Some villains only need one role to become unforgettable, not the Gary Oldmans or the Alan Rickmans. I'm talking about the other guys. The faces you remember instantly, even if you never learned their names. The actors who weren't famous, didn't have long careers, maybe even vanished after one incredible performance, but somehow left a deep mark. This episode is a celebration of those one-off, unforgettable villain performances from the 80s and 90s action and sci-fi world, the VHS warriors, the dystopian nightmares, the henchmen who should have gotten their own spin-offs. So, let's dive in. We have to start with the granddaddy of forgotten villain icons, Vincent Klyn as Fender Tremolo in Cyborg. Fender isn't really a character, he's a presence. Bare-chested, covered in chains, white eyes that look like he's possessed by the apocalypse itself. Klyn wasn't an actor, he was a professional surfer, discovered because his physique and aura were too perfect to ignore, and in Cyborg he created one of the most brutal and unforgettable villains of the entire VHS-era. He barely speaks, and when he does, his voice sounds like sandpaper dipped in gasoline. And his lines?
I wanna own it. I'd be a god.
They couldn't be more simple, but it's all physicality, all movement, all intimidation. The kind of villain you remember even if you forgot everything else about the film. And after Cyborg, Klyn's career fizzled out. But maybe that's how legends work. One perfect role, burned into your memory forever. Henry Silva had one of those faces that seemed genetically engineered for villainy. Sharp, angular, intense. He could stare through you like he was reading your soul's criminal record.
I don't want any more problems. I don't enjoy babysitting.
And in Above the Law, his villain presence absolutely peaks. As the icy, calculating mastermind behind the film's conspiracy, Silva doesn't need theatrics. He plays him with the calm assurance of a man who knows he's always 3 steps ahead of everyone else in the room, including Steven Seagal. What makes Silva so memorable is how effortless he is. He doesn't shout, he doesn't rage, he just is. That stillness is what makes him dangerous. Silva did dozens of villain roles throughout his career, from crime thrillers to sci-fi oddities, but Above the Law is where everything aligned. The look, the energy, the era, the tone, giving us one of the most quietly menacing antagonists of the late 80s action cinema. I don't know about you, but I can still hear his voice like it's part of my childhood DNA.
Your brother's soul is mine.
Cary-Hiroyuki Tagawa as Shang Tsung. Tagawa treats Mortal Kombat like it's Shakespearean tragedy. He gives this comic book sorcerer a level of weight and charisma the movie absolutely didn't deserve, but desperately needed. He smirks, he commands, he monologues, he chews every inch of the scenery. But he also brings something genuinely threatening. He's both ridiculous and intimidating, which is a rare combination, the proof of how iconic he was. Decades later, the video games brought him back to play Shang Tsung, because nobody else could do it. One villain role so strong it became canon. Patrick Kilpatrick's villain turn in Class of 1999 is one of those perfect little time capsules of the early 90s. He plays a homicidal robot gym teacher.
Once this program has been implemented, I'm afraid it can't be turned off. The bottom line is kill the enemy.
Which is already fantastic, but it's the way he plays him that makes it memorable.
You got a bad attitude, boy.
He moves like a machine. His posture, his stiffness, his voice. It's all this uncanny, unsettling mix of human and machine, brought to life without a single CGI trick. Just pure physical acting. The movie itself is pure dystopian fun. Gangs, neon, chrome, smoke machines. Everything that made 1990 look like it was predicting 2020. But Kilpatrick steals it. It's one of the rare performances that feels like the actor took the silly premise absolutely seriously, and that's why it works so well. It's unhinged, it's weird, and it's iconic. We cannot talk about action villains without mentioning Al Leong, the greatest henchman who ever lived. He never had a big villain monologue, but he didn't need one. In Lethal Weapon, Die Hard, Big Trouble in Little China, Action Jackson, he shows up, the camera lands on him, and your brain goes, "Hey, good to see you again." Leong brought martial arts precision and an instantly recognizable look. Long hair, Fu Manchu, intense stare. He could fight, fall, get shot, explode, get electrocuted, and never look out of place. And the fact that he casually grabs a chocolate bar in Die Hard just because he can, look, for my 12-year-old mind, that made the idea of being a professional criminal really appealing. I mean, who wouldn't want to do cool stuff like stealing candy right off the shelf in the middle of a heist? He was the secret weapon of 80s action. Directors knew that if he was in the background, even for 5 seconds, the scene instantly had 200% more style. He never got a starring villain role, but he didn't need one. His face is the 80s villain aesthetic. Ed Ross gave an incredible villain performance in Red Heat as Victor Rostavili, the ruthless Georgian drug lord who becomes the target of Arnold Schwarzenegger and Jim Belushi's Odd Couple Pursuit. Ross gives Victor this cold, snake-like charisma. He's violent, unpredictable, and absolutely committed to staying one step ahead of everyone. And somehow he still feels grounded, like a real guy you would not want to owe money to. What's interesting is that Ross seemed to be poised to become one of the standout villains of the late 80s. He had the look, the voice, the presence, everything. But after Red Heat, he drifted towards smaller parts and character roles, never again getting a villain role with this much weight behind it, which honestly just makes Victor Rostavili even more special. A one-time, perfectly calibrated performance that fit the world of 80s action like a glove dipped in pure Soviet menace. Now, let's go from grounded intensity to pure cinematic madness. James Hong's Lo Pan is one of the greatest cult villains of all time, and honestly one of the most fun performances ever put in a fantasy action film. Lo Pan is ancient, immortal, sarcastic, theatrical, tragic, and hilarious, sometimes all in the same scene. Hong plays him with absolute commitment, never once winking at the camera, even though the entire film is basically one big wink. The makeup took hours, the costume weighed a ton, and Hong improvised a surprising amount of his own dialogue. But it's his voice, his presence, and that mischievous energy that makes Lo Pan unforgettable, is the kind of performance that only happens once in a career and once in a genre. Matthias Hues gave us one of the strangest and coolest villains of the early 90s sci-fi, a giant alien hitman who walks into the frame, mutters,
"I come in peace,"
and then murders everyone. This role is a masterclass in physical presence. He barely speaks, barely emotes, he just exists, and that's enough to make him terrifying. The whole movie is pure VHS magic. Dolph Lundgren running after a silent extraterrestrial Terminator who steals dopamine from humans. It's weird, it's fun, and Matthias is the reason it works. The producers cast him because he was the only guy who looked like he could scare Dolph Lundgren, and honestly, mission accomplished. Hues did a lot of B-movies afterward, but nothing ever matched this beautiful, bizarre alien villain. David Patrick Kelly is the king of chaotic energy. As Luther in The Warriors, he steals the entire movie with just a few scenes, especially the iconic
Warriors, come out to play,
which he improvised with bottles he found on set. Then he plays Sully in Commando, a sleazy little scumbag who exists solely to be thrown off a cliff by Arnold Schwarzenegger, and yet he's memorable. Very few actors could create two iconic villains in two totally different tones. Kelly didn't become a regular villain actor, he drifted into quieter roles, but those two performances, they will live forever.
Remember, Sally, when I promised to kill you last?
That's right, Major, you did.
I lied.
Robert Zadar gave us one of the great horror action hybrids of the 80s with Officer Matt Cordell, the undead killer cop from Maniac Cop. With his massive jawline and silent, unstoppable presence, Zadar didn't need special effects, he was the special effect. Cordell is part slasher villain, part urban legend, and part tragic anti-hero, and Zadar plays him with an eerie stillness that makes him feel like a supernatural force even before the movie reveals it. If you rented videos in the 80s or 90s, you remember that face.
It's this pig and his cop friends broke my ribs, my leg, and my jaw.
You broke that jaw?
You deserved it.
Why did you do that?
You remember that nightstick, you remember that police cap. It's one of the most iconic villain designs in low-budget horror, and Zadar made it work through pure presence alone. These actors might not have had long villain careers, some disappeared, some went to TV, some did stunts or theater or conventions, but every one of them created something unforgettable. A moment, a look, a line, a performance that stuck with us long after the credits. And that's why I love doing these episodes. Because film history isn't just made by the famous names at the top of the posters. Sometimes it's made by the guy in the background with the Fu Manchu, or the robot teacher, or the undead cop, or the surfer who accidentally became the greatest post-apocalyptic villains of all time. This is just the first part of the VHS baddies, there is plenty more, and more villain portraits and film essays are on the way as well, so stick around, and thanks for watching.